I'd like to welcome you to the Mekong River here in northern Thailand. I've spent almost a decade now traveling quite a bit on my motorcycle, but I have four main countries that the Mekong River travels through. This river has always attracted me for whatever reason it might be, but you know, it's a historic river. And one of the things that I've seen here recently that's pretty dramatic, and you see it here, is the fact that there's massive reduction in water flowing through the Mekong. And the main reason for that is the dams, the big dams in China. There's 11 of them for the production of electricity. There's another one in Laos across the river there further up, and there's also one in Cambodia with the projection of upwards of another 20 dams. Well, you can see the effect that these dams have. But one of the big effects is the massive reduction in water supply to this river brought about by China, who controls the water tap, if you will. So what we're going to do with what I'm calling the River Project is we're going to dive into some of the other issues as well as the dams that create this particular situation here. So with that, I welcome you into this particular project. Follow along, formulate your own opinions, do your own research, and see what you come up with towards the end of it. But it's pretty dramatic here on the Mekong now. So with that, we'll dive into some of the issues, and I hope you'll follow along, and I hope you'll enjoy it. I'd also like to give a shout out for the Life Cafe here for allowing me to film near this rock. Wonderful people. Well, with that, we'll move on, and we'll deal with some of the issues. Thanks for being here. Okay, welcome back to the River Project. As stated in the introduction, we're going to deal with some of the issues that go along with what's happening to the Mekong River. And the first one we already talked about a little bit, but that's the water flow in the Mekong River. The dramatic reduction of that water flow is obviously due to dams, many dams, and there are proposals for many more dams on the Mekong River. All right. So with that water flow being reduced, it creates a lot of other issues. Creates issues with fisheries, creates issues with the people that try to grow crops along the Mekong. And then another one is what happens to the temperature of the water. As this river slows down, there's more and more shallow areas that the water is warming up. And what effect does that have on the fish? What effect does that have in particular on the quality of the water for the people that have to live from it? So that's one major issue, is the actual flow of the river, the quality of the river as far as the amount of water coming through it. The next issue we'll deal with is going to be a big one that's worldwide. It's called sand mining. Okay, another issue that I alluded to, and it's a big one worldwide, and it's called sand mining. Now some people might ask, why in the world would you mine sand? Well, the answer to that is right here in the river. All right, in any of these major rivers, those sand molecules have been rolled down the river for centuries. And what happens to that molecule of sand is it fractures, gets multifaceted faces on the sand. And why it's desirable is because this makes much stronger concrete. So with all of the mega building that's going on all over the world, people want strong concrete, so they want this sand. So that's another major issue, not only on the Mekong, but worldwide. Sand mining, and the effects are dramatic. Well, another major issue here on the Mekong, and it's not just the Mekong, it's all over the world, and that is pollution. Looking out at the river right now, there's bags of trash floating down this river. And speaking with a young lad that actually grew up here, even he said that the amount of pollution that's gone into the river since he was a child is immense. And you see it every day here. People will wrap up their trash in a plastic bag, tie it off, and throw it in the river. And then it's somebody else's problem. How do we address this? In the past, I think the best way, and maybe in the future as well, is to need to educate the children. And let the children educate the adults as to the effects that pollution has not only on the river, but on the landscape as a whole. So that's another thing to think about, is how do we go about educating people so that the pollution doesn't end up in this river, another insult, if you will, to what used to be a very majestic and historic river. Well, another issue on this river with the dramatic reduction in water flow. I've come by, I guess, as I said before, riding over 400,000 kilometers in Southeast Asia to this point. I used to come along this river and actually be able to see larger boats coming up this river. The rocks, you couldn't see the rocks. Every once in a while, you know, you might have rocks popping out. This used to be a series of large rapids, but nonetheless, it was deep enough for these larger boats to get up to Changsan and further up the river. That doesn't happen anymore. So that's another major effect of when you start drawing the water down to the extent that it is. So what does that have to do with transportation? Yes, we can do everything by truck. It's a lot more expensive than what it used to be by doing it by river. But nonetheless, it still affects the people as a whole that live here. They used to be able to transport their goods downriver or upriver without any problems. Put it on a large barge or a large boat and send it on its way. So, in another way that it's affected the economy of the people that live along the Mekong River. Hello, I'd like to welcome you back to the River Project, and currently today we're sitting along the Mekong River in a place called Chiang Khong. And I want to deal with a couple more issues that I haven't dealt with yet, and one of them is fish migration. So we're going to dive into that here real shortly, so stick with me, I'll be right back with you. Okay, back with you here, sun in my face nonetheless, but one of the areas that we haven't dealt with yet, it's called fish migration. And that is, in the Mekong River there are several fish that migrate, all right? One of them is the Mekong giant catfish. And when that catfish is not allowed to migrate, it becomes extinct. And at this particular time, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 giant catfish in the entire 1,300 kilometer range of the Mekong River. And that is because it cannot climb dams or get by the dams. The same problem that we have in the United States with the salmon, with the dams. The only difference is the salmon are, for the most part, quite a bit smaller than the giant catfish. Nonetheless, the issues are the same. So with more and more dams, there's less and less fish being able to migrate to what they normally used to do. So with that, let's touch on another area here, and I'll be right back with you. Okay, I hope you can hear me all right. We have competition across the river in Laos. But continuing with the migration, the fish migration issue. The dams are not allowing the fish to migrate as they have for thousands and thousands of years. One really good example of a fishery that has been dramatically affected by the fact that the flow in the Mekong has reduced as it has. And that is a lake in Cambodia called Tonle-Sap. It's one of the largest, if not the largest, inland lake, freshwater lake in Southeast Asia. And what used to happen once a year when the Mekong River would flood, it would actually reverse the flow of the river coming out of Tonle Sap back into the lake, bringing necessary nutrients for the fish as well as fish that usually migrate. That doesn't happen anymore. And it doesn't happen anymore because of the dams. And primarily, the person that controls the dams, once again, is China. So with that, let's move into another issue associated with this. Continuing with the fish migration issues, when you take into account the length of the Mekong River that originally starts in the Himalayas in northern China, it's almost 1,500 miles long. And when you think about that, the amount of people that rely on this river for that amount of distance is incredible. And they're dramatically affected by what's happening, or what has been referred to as the collapse of the Mekong River ecosystem. And that is definitely happening. So I brought about the conclusion before this particular fish immigration issue. And I'm probably going to change the conclusion a little bit, because I think in the first conclusion, which I will include, I think it was just a little, shall we say, easy on the main contributor to this problem, that being China. Because China not only builds their own dams, as I'd stated previously, they also build dams for across the river here, Laos, Cambodia, all the way down to the Mekong Delta, which it has been stated by scientists that by 2040, at the rate of the reduction of the Mekong River currently, by again 2040, the Mekong Delta will no longer exist. And when you consider the historic value, not to mention the amount of people that live and rely on that Mekong Delta, it's absolutely incredible. So what are we going to do? What's anybody going to do? You look at the Asian group of people that are in charge, the main countries that, except for China, that this river flows through, and they seem to be afraid to address China. China is the big guy. China is the one that's got the button on the water. And so what do? Something has to happen, or this river system is going to go to the point where it's completely collapsed, the ecosystem's gone, the fisheries are gone, and the people that rely on this river are going to starve. And that has to do with fisheries as well as the way they grow their crops. It's all related to the amount of flow and water coming in the Mekong. Think about it. So if you will, that concrete pillar on the right-hand side of your screen, if you follow the brown going up the concrete, those are the areas where the river actually used to flow, in particular at the top during flood stage. So you can see how dramatic the reduction of water flow is here. Where you see the green brush and trees to the left of that, that actually used to be the original riverbank itself. Well, looking at this river today and knowing what it was like 10 years ago, really ask myself, what's it going to be in another 10 years? What's going to happen to the people that live the 1,500-mile range or longer of the Mekong River? This river once was called the Mother of Waters because it provided life for everyone along the river from China on down. It brought about new generations of people, it fed those people, and they were capable of moving on. But now, the Mother of Waters just seems to be dwindling away, and mainly because of the person that controls the water, the majority of the water on the Mother of Waters, and that's China. China has to be dealt with, because eventually it's going to affect China and their people. So there you are. What are we as humans going to do about it? By 2040, the scientists are saying that the Mekong Delta will no longer exist. Welcome back to what I'm referring to as the River Project, and it's the disappearing Mekong. This is a follow-up from the documentary that I did 1 year ago, and the purpose of this is to come back to Thailand here along many of the same stretches where I filmed last year and shoot some additional footage this year just to give you a comparison as to how much lower the Mekong River has gotten. So I hope you'll follow along with this, and hopefully it'll be educational so that you also can determine by yourself as to how rapidly the Mekong or the ecosystem of the Mekong River is disappearing. With that, we'll continue on and give you some additional footage, if you will, to show you how dramatic this situation is getting. Welcome to the River Project, the disappearing Mekong. So this year I'm back at one of the same areas, just a little upriver from Chiang Khong, to see how much difference there is between last year and this year, and it's pretty dramatic. The rapids that's down there and the rapids and the beaches that you see up here on the other side of the river in Laos, that's where the water was. So it's dropped, looks to me, it's dropped probably 5 to 6 feet since where it was this time last year. Once again, a lot of garbage, trash being flown down the river here. But nonetheless, we're still asking ourselves, how are we going to fix this problem? The Mekong River, or the mother of waters, every year it's decreasing, getting smaller, getting shallower, except for those that choose to build the dams and profit off the electricity from those dams, while the local people, the indigenous people, suffer from not having the mother of waters that used to be their livelihood. With that, we're going to try to get into some of the issues with water rights and who actually owns this river. What I hope to do is to be able to introduce an agreement that was signed in 1995 by the countries from which the Mekong River actually flows through. And its purpose, from what I've read, and it's a very intense document with a lot of ambiguous areas in it, but nonetheless, its purpose is to supposedly guide the countries that the Mekong River flows through as to how and what they can do with the river. And I'm sure, as you already know from the first documentary, that one of the major issues are the dams. And there are plans, as I stated in the documentary a year ago, there are plans for more dams. And what those dams have done to the river at this point is, let's just say, astronomical. So I would like to be able to delve into this, if you will, and hopefully within it I'll be able to give you some of the highlights of what this agreement actually means or doesn't mean. Because one of the first things that I read was that there's a disclaimer in there that says none of these agreements are binding by any of the such countries. So we'll look into that a little bit further and figure out, hopefully maybe figure out what they mean by that. With that, we'll move into another portion of this. Transboundary. What exactly does this term mean? What we need to go back to is the MRC guidelines. The MRC was founded in 1995, as previously stated. And its purpose was to the 4 countries that the Mekong River flowed through south of China. Form this group, committee, consortium, whatever you want to call it, to set out guidelines that if someone's going to design a project that's on the Mekong and affects its neighbors, they came up with the guidelines for transboundary. And transboundary simply means that if someone's going to design a project, a dam in this case, many dams, and part of that dam encroaches upon another country's sovereign border, it becomes transboundary. So the country that's designing the project has to work with the other countries that the project may affect. And those guidelines include environmental studies, exactly how the dam is going to be done, built, what effects it will have for the people downstream, and so forth. So that's what the term transboundary means. And we'll get into that term even more as we discover the number of projects that are projected, or planned, if you will. Additionally, less than 2 weeks ago, another major dam within Laos on the Mekong River was approved in conjunction with China, the financing organization. And the studies that need to be presented to the adjoining countries that this project will affect. So we're going to look at whether those transboundary stipulations or regulations are actually followed through with the MRC. Because Laos has not been particularly honest about their projects or have not actually abided by the guidelines that were set forth by the MRC, of which they are a member. So we're going to take a little closer look at what transboundary actually means. What we're looking at right now is Thailand is building, I guess you could say, a wall along their part of the river. And that's what you're looking at from my drone here for 2 purposes. One, it's going to be a really fantastic bike path for the entire length of the Mekong River within Thailand. But more importantly, what it is the fact that the river continues to encroach upon Thailand's land. Because where we're at right now, Laos owns the entire Mekong River. So what Thailand is doing is protecting their border, if you will, by building this wall to prevent the Mekong River from eroding their land away, and it ends up belonging to Laos. That's what we're looking at right here. In the end, hopefully it'll be a really nice bike path for a lot of miles or kilometers. And secondly, it'll stop the deterioration of Thailand's land along the Mekong River. Because as I previously stated, as it's been explained to me, Laos owns the entire river here from water to water. So Thailand is making an effort to protect their own land. The country of Laos. You need to understand that Laos is also one of the poorest countries in Southeast Asia. They are run by a one-party communist system with a tremendous amount of corruption. So the idea was that Laos would become the battery of Southeast Asia. And the idea was to dam up as many of the tributaries as they could with hydroelectric dams, as well as putting hydroelectric dams on the main stretch of the Mekong River. At this point, they've done so. They've built over, I guess, 70 dams total. And we'll go into the actual dams that are on the main flow of the Mekong River. But backing up a little bit, it's important to understand that a number of years ago, as I pointed out in the first documentary of the disappearing Mekong, that 2 of these dams failed within less than a year of their completion, flooding out thousands of villages, killing a number of people, displacing thousands more. It's important to understand that many of these dam projects are not properly researched. And even though Laos is a member of what's called the MRC, the Mekong Regional Commission, consortium, so to speak, that they gave little input to any of the other countries as to what they were doing with these dams. And consequently, with these 2 failures and the amount of damage and deaths that occurred, the other 3 countries, that being Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia, kind of stood up and wondered, whoa, wait a minute here. Maybe there needs to be a little bit more research goes into these projects before they just randomly place them, if you will, without proper environmental study. With that, I think it's important to take the opportunity to look at the map and look at the number of dams that are currently projected for the mainstream of the Mekong, and additionally the ones that are currently in operation, and the ones that are also planned. Currently, Laos plans over 100 additional dams. And it's important to understand the effects of the current dams on the Mekong, including the 11 super dams and storage dams that are in China. So let's take another look. We'll take a look at the map and see what we're actually looking at. The map does not show all of the dams that are built currently in Laos. That would be the tributary dams, and another dam that less than a month ago has been approved. There again, these dams are financed. The majority of these dams are financed by China. Same thing in Cambodia. The dams are financed by China. And we'll also take a look as to what this financing has done to the incredible debt that these countries are incurring by allowing China to come in, build these dams, they finance them, and we'll take a look at that as well. So we're looking at a map, and it's a simplified map of the Mekong River, starting out here, or actually coming out of China right here, and going all the way down, eventually ends up down here, which is not on the map, which is Mekong Delta in Vietnam. So what I want to show here is these black ones, all right, and there's 11 total, so there's more further up on the map in China. Those are the super dams in China right now. Then we get to these white ones, the ones that are white, as I'm showing here, all the way down, and there's more down in this area here. Those are the proposed dams. They're not under construction yet, but then you have the Xanaburi Dam, which is the largest single dam in Laos, and that is, like I said, at this time it's the largest single dam on the Mekong River, on the lower Mekong basin, if you will, and that's producing 1,285 megawatt. However, this right here, the Paklay Dam, which was actually approved and is under construction right now, and they signed everything off with China at about 4 weeks ago, and that will actually be much bigger than Xanaburi Dam, and that will produce 1,320 megawatts. And then as you go further down here in Cambodia, and I'm probably not going to pronounce this right, but Don Chahong, is another dam that's in Cambodia. And then they're proposing another one here for Strong Trang. And as you can see, there's further dams down here that are additionally proposed. But you can kind of understand that when you're talking about this many dams, and if they all actually go in production, you can imagine the dramatic effect that it's going to have on the Mekong River, given the reduction in flow that we already have. And this is the Tonle Sap, the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia. And you can see where the river, when it used to flow and it would flood, it would actually run backwards into Tonle Sap, providing it with the migratory fish as well as increased sediment, which is definitely required for this type of fishery. So that gives you some kind of idea, basic idea of what the map looks like, and as far as the number of dams that are currently proposed and currently operating on the lower Mekong River basin, if you will. And excuse my chopstick, but hey, it's Southeast Asia. Sediment. What are we talking about with sediment with regards to the Mekong River? Sediment being the very, very fertile soil, if you will, that has flowed down the full length of the Mekong River for thousands of years, all the way from the high plateaus in the Himalayas in northern China. Why is this sediment so important? It is a nutrient-rich soil that flows, at least it was flowing, the full length of the Mekong River until they started building dams. Currently, the super dams in China hold back a tremendous amount of the sediment, which is necessary for the fish, necessary for the crops that are grown along the Mekong River, in particular rice crops. And it also affects the major fisheries such as the Tonle Sap, which is the largest inland lake in Southeast Asia in Cambodia. As they continue to build more and more of these dams, more and more of this sediment is not allowed to flow downstream. With the projection of 2040, with the reduction in this sediment, by 2040, the scientists are saying that the Mekong Delta will no longer exist to be one of the major producers of rice in the world, as well as the rice that is produced along the Mekong further north. So that's another dramatic issue that we're dealing with regards to these dams and increasing dams along the Mekong River. What's going to happen when the sediment no longer flows? Or a more interesting question is, what's going to happen when the sediment gets to be a problem for these dams as it backs up behind these dams? In particular, the fact that these are hydroelectric dams. Think about it. Sediment. China's ever-increasing role and expansion has a lot to do with what's happening on the Mekong River, and thereby leading to the possibility of weaponizing the Mekong River. If one of these countries decides to side with, let's just hypothetically say, America, where China has already made a foothold, China's not going to be happy with that. And with regards to the Mekong River, it's a fairly simple solution for them. They can shut off the water flow on the Mekong River. What are the other three countries? What are they going to think about the country that sided with America, or any other country for that matter, that is not in line with China's policies? So now, all of a sudden, you have three countries that are going against the one country that decided to side with someone else as far as help with their education, help with their infrastructure. Enter China with the weaponization of the Mekong River. Financing. So who's financing all of these dams? It basically comes down to three countries that are the major financiers for all of these electrical dams. They're China, Japan, and South Korea. Those are the big ones. China obviously is one of the really big ones, but nonetheless, those are the primary three. The latter two of which, Japan and South Korea, they're the ones that actually supported and actually built one of these large tributary dams, or two of the large tributary dams that I spoke about in the first documentary, that failed and caused massive destruction, lives, displacement of villages, and so forth downstream. So why are these people spending so much money for all this electrical energy, and where is the electricity actually going? Thailand, recently, or not too long ago, they were the major financer in what's called the Exburi Dam, I'm probably not saying that correct, in Laos, which is the single largest hydroelectric dam on the Mekong River, the southern portion of the Mekong River, or the Mekong River Basin. And they completely financed that dam with, in turn, they control 38% of the dam, as well as they get 90% of the electricity that's generated from that dam. The other 10% goes to the people of Laos. You figure out that one. But anyhow, eventually, the big question I think that needs to be asked is, you have all these hydroelectric dams. What do hydroelectric dams need? They need water. Well, what happens as to the same situation that's going on in China right now, where they're in a massive, long-term freshwater shortage? You just don't get the water. It just doesn't all of a sudden appear. So with global warming, and many of these dams go into drought stage, what happens then? Where's the electricity coming from? Not only that, but these companies, or these countries rather, that spent so much money investing in this, and they're losing dramatic amount of money. Now what? What has that done to the economy of the country? I don't know. Where am I going to go with this project? I've been asking myself that for, the better part of 2 years, I guess, since I decided I was going to do this, and I've been actually filming segments of this for the last 6 years. What am I going to accomplish? What's my goal? So those questions have been nagging me for thousands of miles, probably thousands of dollars. But nonetheless, what do I want to accomplish out of this? And I think for me, the answer is fairly simple, and it's to raise public awareness. Now, can we make a difference by raising public awareness over the powers that control a project such as this river? Maybe, maybe not. But as I told a young man this morning, a young engineer, and I was telling him about this project, he was asking about it. And I told him, I said, your generation is the only answer that's going to be able to do or save this river. Unfortunately, his response was, well, it's probably going to be my next generation. Well, that's 30, 40 years down the road. This river will not exist as the Mekong River historically has been for thousands of years. And so I told him, I said, no, you got this wrong. I said, it's your responsibility, it's your generation's responsibility to become active in this process, however you can do, whether you do it as an engineer, whether you do it as an activist, but it's up to you. It's up to the younger generation to be able to somehow change people's minds. And the people's minds that need to be changed, that's where the problem, and that's where it's going to become difficult. Because too much of many of these projects, like the disappearing Mekong, all revolves around how much money can be made. And that money being made is not made for the little people that live along the river, or the little people that reside along the river and have depended upon the mother of waters for thousands of years. Unfortunately, it has to come from people working their way up within those power establishments that can make a difference. At least I hope from I'm 75 years old. This is all I can do. But nonetheless, it's definitely going to be up to you folks out there, your younger people. Get educated. Take a part. And I know that's really difficult in countries that basically are a one-party system, a dictatorship, if you will. They establish the rules, and if you buck the rules, you go to jail. So that doesn't lead to a conducive environment to be able to buck a project that's happening on the Mekong River. But somebody has to do it. Or this river, it's very close to being on ecological collapse right now. There are parts of this river further downstream within Laos, rather, that it's been told to me that currently you can walk across the Mekong River. Yeah, that's what I said. Walk across the Mekong River. That is unbelievable. And another thing that just happened recently, about a week ago, is the water's gotten so low that all of a sudden, I'm not sure what they call these. It's not a wat, it's not a pagoda. Like I said, I'm not Buddhist, I don't know what they are. But all of a sudden, one of these things pops out of the river because the river has gotten so low. And this dates back thousands of years. So, and of course, everybody's flocking to it now. But that's just a prime example of what's happening all along the Mekong River here. So, as I stated last year in my conclusion, in this same spot, what are we going to do about it? Come on, young people, what are you going to do about it? It's time. It's actually maybe even past time, but it has to happen. So I plead with you, get involved. I don't care what the government is, how big they are. Do it in a respectful way if you can, but change has to happen. Otherwise, the mother of waters is no longer the mother of anything. Think about that, folks. This is Hobo Rider, Witch's Brew Productions. We're looking back at you one more time. Thank you. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to attempt to do is to get my drone back, because there are a whole bunch of angry bees And the sound of this drone has not made them happy at all. So I'm going to try and retrieve my drone without them destroying it, hopefully. So here we go. We're coming into their area, and the sound drives them absolutely crazy. So I'm going to try to land this as fast as I can. And here they come. Alright, we accomplished that. Woohoo! No bee bites, but they sure were angry in the beginning. Well, I'm not sure if my camera will pick it up or not, but obviously I got a lot of bees. As you can see, the guts and everything from the bees on the drone. To say they were upset was, let's just say, an understatement. But we were able to retrieve the drone without any damage. A lot of bugs smashed on the propellers, but so be it. Another safe drone flight.